Hey, y'all. Hey. Hi, Cement Shoes. Hey, Momo. Hey, Tony. Shamita. Good to see everybody. Whew, how's it going? Hope everybody's Monday was good. I'm tired, man. This morning's live wiped me all the way out. And the thing of it is, like, I wasn't even doing anything. But you want to hear a funny story? So, okay, I was streaming the live and it was on Law and Crime, and I was all excited about it, and I'm thinking, oh, Law and Crime has a new graphic, right? And it's looking kind of cool. Man, this afternoon after lunch, the graphic was up, and then the camera panned down, and I realized, oh my God, it is not a new graphic. It's the painting or whatever the hell it is behind the judge's head. And I felt so stupid, but I thought it was really cool the way that they had it. That's their like hold screen for whenever like the jury is entering and exiting and stuff, so they don't film the jurors. So yeah, I felt like all the compliments I ever got about how smart I am and well spoken and knowledgeable went right the fuck out the window because I really did think that dadgum judge or that the long crime had a new graphic, and it's kind of cool because it looks like an inmate, right? It sort of looks like an orange prison, the striped uniform or whatever. And I hang on just a second. Um, and then when I saw that, I was like, "Oh my god, Jen, you have to tell them about this. How ridiculously unsmart you are sometimes." So yeah, but it was kind of cool. Anyway, so what I thought we would do tonight is I don't want to spoil anything for anybody. Hey, Vincent's missing ear. Yeah. Hey, Amelia Sparkles. You haven't missed anything. I just started, babe. So, what I thought we would do tonight is the entire day of the trial today was comprised solely of opening statements, and court recessed at 3:30 this afternoon, an early day for them. So, Law and Crime has very graciously clipped the 5, that's right, 5, not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, 5, FIVE hour-long opening statement given by the state into the most important parts. And then I thought we would go through that a little bit just as a recap because quite honestly, hey, Team Psych Word, good to see you, babe. Quite honestly, I know that Amelia was in here this morning, and so was Tony. I know that for sure. And Vincent and Cement Shoes are usually my at nighttime. Shmita was in here a little bit. Mo was not, but I know she was watching the replay. And to be quite frank with you guys, I have some great. Okay, I know that the opening statements aren't everything. Okay, and they're not really indicative of how the trial is gonna go. Okay, but I was excited for this trial. You guys have no idea. Do you know how many times I was refreshing Law and Crime's channel today to make sure that looking for their live scheduled, okay, for the scheduled live, yes, like 11 billion. It was probably 50, 1100, 11 billion times that I was doing it. And this opening statement was so detailed, but they lost me. And I'm like, I'm not even being paid to sit there. I probably would have been even more lost if I had been paid as a juror, which is sad to say. Oh, Team Psych Word, I want to tell you, I couldn't answer you. I mean, I just can't do both. I can't talk and type at the same time, unfortunately. I wanted to tell you that ever since YouTube updated, everybody's chat has been glitchy. Like sometimes what'll happen is like right now I'm watching the chat on my phone and on my computer, but this morning my chat on my phone just completely timed out for no reason. And there's other times when I'm watching lives, not so much on the TV, but definitely on the computer or on the phone, and the chat will stop. It's happening to everybody, and I guess the solution is to close out of the chat and then open it back up and go back and forth between live and talk chat until it fixes. It's an issue. Yes. Vincent, I'm okay. I will say this. Okay. So I made a little video to sort of recap the entire case. It's only like a 2 minute and 40-second video, and I don't even talk. So it's just the music and stuff. So the situation is, this case is the most expensive case in Ohio's history ever. And it is a complicated case because there are truly 4 different crime scenes. Now, 3 of the crime scenes are located on the same property, okay? But it's still difficult. And the 4th crime scene is like a mile and a half down the road. And Skynet. It's like a mile and a half down the road. And it was the last crime scene to be discovered. In fact, I think that the first 911 call went out at about 8, I believe, in the morning. And the last 911 call was the cousins and Kenneth Roden, and it was getting, I think, around lunchtime is when his body was discovered. So it's a very complicated case. And I think that the prosecutor was afraid of leaving out details. And I think that, unfortunately, she didn't leave out any details, but there were some really key moments in her opening statement that I am concerned, which obviously, okay, this is the way I look at opening statements. So for me, opening statement is essentially like the game plan. Okay, this is what the prosecution or the defense, this is what their strategy is going to be. Okay, so I like it to be a highlight reel. Okay, so I like for it for them to talk about the victims, right? Make the victims personable to the jury, then discuss the evidence. But when you discuss the evidence, you got to be careful that you don't give too many details, so much so that the really important parts are lost on the jury. Okay. And so for me, one of the really important parts that I think was lost on the jury today was, correct, Vincent's missing ear. It should be an overview. Okay. It shouldn't be the whole last trial. I mean, gosh. So for me, one of the key points that she should have, in my opinion, would have been an excellent key point. Well, let me do this before I go on. Let me just go ahead and play this video for you guys that will sort of summarize what the trial is about. Okay. And then we'll talk. Okay. Okay. Here we go. Are you ready? Okay. Here we go.
I beat the hell out of them. It's all this stuff that's on the news. I just found my cousin with a gunshot wound. Okay, sir, is she alive? No.
arrested 6 people in connection with the heinous crime.
The youngest Wagner son, Jake, was in court today. It is his custody dispute over a daughter with victim Hannah Roden that investigators say prompted the murders.
As George Wagner IV stands trial, his mother Angela and younger brother Jake are expected to testify against him.
Okay. So, yes. That's basically the crime in a nutshell. Okay. Unfortunately, what happened this morning was that the opening statement was so long and so detailed that, in my opinion, what she sort of failed to do was to connect George IV to the crime. So yes, cement shoes. So let me explain how this works. Okay. They charged Angela Wagner, who is George IV, and Jake Wagner's, that's the mother. George III, but he goes by Billy. And so anytime you hear the prosecutor refer to Billy, that's who they're talking about. Angela and Billy Wagner are George and Jake's parents. Jake had a child, a 2-year-old at the time, Sophia, with Hannah May. There's 2 Hannahs in this case too, one with an H and one without. Hey, and 5, 6, 7, 8. So Jake and Hannah May Roden had a 2-year-old child together. And then she had split up with him, and they were not on that good of terms. And according to the prosecution, the Wagner family was very, very controlling, particularly of the wives or girlfriends of their sons. Okay. And they all functioned as a single unit. And so when Hannah May broke away, she had a short relationship with Hannah Gilley's brother, which is Hannah May's brother's fiance, and they had 2 children in common. Okay. It's very complicated. Hey, Sam. Night, night, sleep tight. Don't let the bed bugs bite. Sweet dreams. So all of this this was all about this custody. Okay. The custody of Hannah's and Jake's daughter. Okay. Who was not there at the time. Hannah's newborn was in the home, and Hannah and I'm drawing a blank right now what his name is. I just oh my gosh, hold on a second. Hannah and Hannah Gilley and her Frankie. Is that right? Frankie? Oh my gosh. My brain is just done today, apparently. They have 2 children together. And so yeah, Frankie. And so they have 2 children together, a 3-year-old and a baby, not a newborn, right? Hannah's was a newborn. Anyway, so Hannah May Roden, she had this very short relationship with Hannah Gilley's brother. And then she ended up in another relationship, and she was pregnant, but the baby is Hannah Gilly's brother's baby. Okay. And so anyway, there's, Jake wanted, like, he didn't like who she was allowing around the baby. He wanted to control who watched Sophia and all of this stuff. And Hannah was not having any of it. And she was in Facebook private messaging someone. And, basically she said, listen, he wants this custody deal. And, I'll die before I do it, or something to that effect. And that was the catalyst for what occurred on April 22nd of 2016 in the early morning hours. Okay. So yes, it's a lot. So on the 16th, on April 22nd, 2016, okay, Dana Roden, and she is the matriarch of the Roden family. It's Dana and Chris Sr. Their children are Hannah, Chris Jr., and Frankie. Okay. They have 3 kids together, but they're divorced. But they're amicable. So it is Dana's sister who would go over to the house and feed Chris Sr.'s pets, dogs. They had pigs. It was a farm. Okay. And so, and that's what she was doing that morning. She put her daughter on the bus, and then she went over to the house. And when she approached the house, what was odd is that the inside dogs were outside. So she walks into this horror scene, and it's her brother-in-law, Chris Sr., who is dead. And hang on a second. I should have written notes so I could look back, because I don't know why my mind is just blank today for some reason. Hold on. Gary, sorry. Gary, which is their cousin. Okay. She finds them dead. Or it's her voice that you hear on the 911 call, but she didn't realize that they had been shot. Okay. She thought that they had been beaten. So she calls 911, and then she goes to Frankie's house. Okay. And they're not that far apart. I mean, they are, but they aren't. You know what I'm saying? And it's not like driving to several different neighborhoods. It's all on the same property. So she goes down to Frankie's house and knocks on the door, and their son answers the door. And she says, "Where is your dad?" And the little boy says, "He's all bloody." And that's how she discovers Frankie Roden and Hannah Gilly in bed, and they'd been shot. And in between them is their 5 or 6 month old son. And Hannah had been nursing him, and he is covered in blood, but he's unharmed. And so is the 3-year-old. And so is Hannah May Roden's 5-day-old newborn, unharmed. None of the children were harmed. Okay. So then they go to Dana's house, and that's when they find Dana, Hannah May, and Chris Jr., who was 16 at the time, all dead. So at this point, they're trying to contact Kenneth, because Kenneth didn't have running water at his home. So it was his practice to come over to his cousin's house and shower in the morning. Is it his brother? I think it's his brother's house. It's a very complicated family tree. And so everybody, they were calling him, and they were thinking, okay, well, he's not going to he doesn't keep his phone on his person during the workday. He keeps it, in his car, and at lunchtime, he'll see all the missed calls, and he'll call us. Well, he wasn't. So they went on down to check out his house, and they discovered him dead as well. So initially, in the first few days, weeks of the crime unfolding, they're sort of thinking that this might be connected to a cartel, because 3 of the properties had a grow operation. They were growing some marijuana. Okay. And, but over time, and they're starting to get the tips, and, they find the shoe prints and in the blood, and all, over time, it becomes evident that the Wagner family, who had a year after, almost a year after this occurred, the entire family had moved to Alaska. And this is another part. At first, when I heard that, let me just say this. 2000, Jen, would have been like, drove to Alaska. You can't drive to Alaska. Remember the story I told you guys about how I used to think Alaska was down there by by Hawaii, because that's how it is on the school maps, to save space. But thankfully, 2022 Jen knows that you can drive to Alaska. So they'd all moved to Alaska, and bottom line is they end up arresting the Wagner family. Okay. So they arrest Billy, the father, Angela, the mother, Frederica, the grandmother, Jake, and George the fourth. Okay. Now, Jake and Angela have taken plea deals. Okay. And Angela was sentenced to 30 years. As part of Jake's plea deal, Jake must testify in this trial, his brother's trial, and his father's trial, because both George the third and George the fourth have pled not guilty. Jake must testify, quote, to the satisfaction of the state in both of those trials in order for the death penalty to be removed from George and Billy. Okay. Now, what I'm not real clear about is A, what to the state's satisfaction means. Okay. And B, if they will take the death penalty, they must have to take the death penalty off the table after each trial. You know what I mean? Like, they couldn't sentence, well, maybe not. I suppose they could sentence him to death and then commute it to life if he were found guilty. But the complicated part of this story is that Jake has confessed, okay? And he said on the record that George Wagner the fourth, did not pull the trigger. He was there, but he didn't pull the trigger. Now, in Ohio and most other states, you don't have to be the person who actually pulls the trigger in order to be complicit and charged even though you're an accessory, the same way that the principal was charged, right? The person who actually took the lives. We're getting there in 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm getting there. Okay. I just like saying that. And 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. So I was part of the opening statements. All right. The people who did the actual shooting, according to Jake Wagner's confession, are his father and himself. However, according to the opening statements today, there were 3 different guns used. Okay. And they have evidence of homemade silencers, and it's very, very, and through the gathering of the evidence, they found a document that was purported to be signed by Hannah Mae Roden, sorry, and stating basically, if something ever happened to her, that custody of Sophia would go to Jake. And it was dated 2014. Okay. Well, through the investigation, when they got a hold of the laptop revealed that that document was not created in 2014, but instead in 2016, and had been backdated to make it appear as if, it had been done prior. Okay. So, no, I know. That's why I like it. I just like it. So that's what the state's theory of the crime is. It was, and I guess stuff that Jake has said. But so as she's going through her opening statement, there is a very, very good key point that I think that she should have, if she were going to expound on anything and maybe shorten everything else, it should have been the tennis shoes. Okay, so this is what happens. So during the course of the investigation, the crime scene techs are out there, right? And they are photographing evidence, yada, yada, yada. Well, in the one of the trailers, one of the homes, they find these bloody footprints. Okay. And they found these they found a footprint in blood. Okay. So then the analyst takes it back. She cuts the piece of flooring out. She takes it back. She's analyzing it, and she's going through the database essentially of like known, shoe marks, right? Sole imprints, right? Sole impressions or whatever. So she's not coming up with anything. So then she realized, I forget what she did. She sent it out or something. Well, it turns out, okay, that this particular mark, it's a shoe impression, comes from a tennis shoe that is sold at Walmart. And upon further inspection, she realizes it's actually two different shoe impressions in the blood. One is a size 10.5 and one is a size 11. Okay. So they track down Walmart. All right. And through the course of the investigation, right before they left for Alaska, the Wagner family puts all of a ton of their possessions in this huge trailer. Okay. And one of their neighbors phoned in a tip. So the cops get a search warrant and they go out there and they search that trailer. And in one of those plastic totes labeled like important things, there is a Walmart receipt, and it is for two tennis shoes. Okay. And so the story from Angela is that she bought those shoes for her boys, but they didn't like them. So she just threw them away. So they went to Walmart and they asked for a specific time frame of, and then they've got Angela Wagner, they've got her receipt and they've got her on video buying those shoes. So it's, not, the thing is, this is what is so important about those shoes. They were purchased for the sole intent to be worn in the commission of this crime. Okay, this is how far this family, I refer to them as the Fireflies, like from The Devil's Rejects, that family, because they're like that. They did so much to thwart being caught, which, I mean, that is really the point. Most people don't commit a crime and look to be caught, obviously, right? So, I mean, they had like phone jammers, they had homemade silencers, they had what else did they do? They had bug detectors, for listening devices, and they go and they talk to the police, and while they're talking to the police, they did put a listening device in the vehicle, and the Wagners come out of the police station and nobody says a word. Like, they were hip to it, So this was a very well thought out, well executed plan. I mean, the fact of the matter is, the only people that they had encountered any resistance from was Chris Sr. because he was awake. He was up and, starting his day when he was murdered. Everybody else, for the most part, was still in bed. So it's just crazy what they did. But where the prosecution sort of lost a little steam is that we heard a lot of what a lot of people did, but very little about what George IV did, what his role in all of this was. Okay. And that is a criticism I have of her opening statement, is that it's not a whole lot of, it's a lot of what Jake did. It's a lot of what Billy did. It's a lot of what Angela did, but it is not a whole lot of what George did. And George is the one on trial here. So now I will say this one interesting thing that she also said. I mean, she said several interesting things, but one of the interesting things she also said was that when they were arriving at the home of Chris Sr., that's where they started. That George handed Jake a gun. So that's important, because that, what I mean, he's old and he knows what a gun is for, right? He is aware that it's not, that it is a deadly weapon. And so that's important. That's a detail that's important. So let me find this playlist. Oh, while I'm scrolling here, I noticed that Law and Crime Network has, it looks like, a preliminary hearing in the Charlie Adelson case. Interesting. Very interesting. I don't know if you guys don't know who that is. That's the family that is on trial for the lawyer in Florida, Dan Markel, his murder. Where is it? Hold on a sec. Let me just look at their videos. See if I can find it like this. There's the defense. Okay. So the first one we're going to watch is the prosecutor is going to detail the plot. All right, so give me just a second and I'll share the screen. It's 43 minutes, and yes, cement shoes. So yeah. So that one's going to be coming up fairly quick, and that one is another family situation, crazy case too. All right, so let me make this full screen. Let me add it to the stream. Look at me being all professional tonight, y'all. Give it up for your girl. And hey, while we're all waiting for this to play, would you guys do me a favor and give your girl a thumbs up, please? I would appreciate it. Helps get me into the out. Oh, for Pete's sake. The whatchamacallits aren't available, closed captions. So I'm going to mute because the audio is ridiculously bad and I want you guys to be able to hear this plot, but never fear. She speaks slow enough that if we speed it up by 1.25, it's not going to be like where you can't understand. All right, ready? Here we go.
She has not been sentenced yet. But what she told us was consistent, obviously, with what our handwriting expert had already she has not been sentenced yet.
Okay, so they're talking about me,
But
Mom.
what she told us was consistent, obviously, with what our handwriting expert had already concluded. And then in April of 2021, Jake Wagner came forward as well. He will be here to testify for you.
Oh,
and
I got to
he will
tell you guys
I
one
guess I
thing.
should back
Okay, I forgot about this part. So yes, Jake and Angela are going to testify. Here is the bummer part, though. Okay, so there was a motion filed and granted, okay, for the witnesses in this trial, which would include Angela and Jake Wagner. They have the option of not being recorded by the media. So theoretically, Angela and Jake can say they don't want to be filmed. And I don't know if they have one or the other. Like if they have the option to not be filmed, but the audio be heard, or if it's you're either filmed or you're not, and you don't get audio either. So if they exercise that option, the star witness really is Jake. And if he exercises that option, I don't know, we'll figure something out, but I will find a way for us to know what he testified to. Okay.
up before I go into what he told us. A proffer means you're giving us a statement and telling us what happened. And in exchange, we give you something in return. The state gives you something. What we agreed to give him was to dismiss the death penalty against him, right? You will learn that he pled to all of the counts in the indictment, all of the specifications, and he received he will receive under that agreement, 8 life without parole sentences consecutive to one another, which just means they're served one after another, which is fiction, legal fiction at that point. But in addition to hundreds of years, with 78 years being mandatory firearm specifications that he has to serve before he even ever gets to his life without parole. I think at one point the judge said to him, "You understand that you will die in prison?" And he said yes. So he understands that. The second part of the agreement, he wanted us to also dismiss the specification against his family, each of his family members. He wanted them to escape the death penalty. And we told him we would not do that unless he agreed to testify in their trials. So if any one of them went to trial, okay? So just so you know what the deal was. He actually kind of—
That's what I think, Vincent. I'm going to look it up later, though.
Seemed to be doing this to benefit his family, at least as much as himself, if not more.
Okay, I'm going to mute so you guys can hear this.
That said, we sat down with him and he told us what had happened. And I will say that we were right about the majority of it. The majority of it being that, he dated Hannah, he fell in love with her. He was very upset when they parted ways. He wanted her very much to come back to him. He, was certainly jealous. But also that the idea to kill these people did not initiate with him. He was definitely a willing participant. He will tell you that his dad was the first to broach the subject with him. And under the idea that Hannah Mae was dating people that they didn't approve of, and that she was letting Sophia be around people that were not good people. And they knew that Hannah, or they believed that Hannah, had been sexually abused by one of a friend of the family, kind of peer age friend of the family, and nobody did anything about that. So they, this concern was laid out as well, that, if anything would happen, nobody would protect Sophia over there. And the idea was that they had to kill Hannah. And Jake said, "No, I'm not going to do that," when his dad first brought the idea to him. However, on another occasion, Jake will tell you that he thought about it, and although he did not believe anything had happened to Sophia at the time of the homicides, he indicated to us that, why would you wait for something to happen? Because you can't undo that. So based on that, and encouraged by his father and encouraged by his mother, they set out on a plan to kill Hannah Mae. At first, it was just going to be Hannah Mae. There was an idea to kill Hannah Mae and kill Corey Holdren and make it look like Corey killed Hannah Mae and then killed himself. Billy didn't think that would fly or work out. believe Angela Wagner at one point suggested that they just rat Chris Sr. out because they knew he had marijuana, and that maybe if he went to prison, that would upset things enough. And Billy said he wouldn't do that to his best friend. But ultimately, this idea snowballed, and it became, we have to kill Hannah Mae, Frankie, little Chris, and big Chris. And then, like I said, on site, that Kenneth got added on to that, or after they had already agreed to their main targets. And again, Jake will tell you freely that they knew there might be other people there, and they knew that they would kill them, even though they were perfectly innocent. He will tell you that they started making plans for this thing in January, which was, a month after they had read that comment by Hannah Mae that they will have to kill me first. He understood that he would probably not end up with custody if he went the legal route. His attorney had told him that in Ohio, because you weren't married, the law favors the mother, that you're not likely to get full custody. And he believed that. He also believed what he had read, that Hannah Mae would never sign custody papers over to him. So he believed the only way to get sole control of his daughter was to kill Hannah Mae and her family members. He will admit that he purchased the silencer parts, that they purchased a truck specifically for this, to commit this offense in. He will admit that Angela Wagner bought the shoes for he and George to wear the night of the homicides, again, trying to make it different sizes than what they normally wore, and to make it a different kind of shoe than they would be caught dead in, frankly. They usually wore boots and usually did not wear tennis shoes, especially that kind of make and style. So he admits that. And the same idea was for the murder truck, the truck that they used for the murder. You'll hear that Billy overheard his cousin saying, or his uncle saying, that he was selling a car. He was talking to Silas Wagner is his name. He was talking to another individual and said that he would sell this truck that he had for $2,500. And Billy said, we'll buy it. And that was one day. And then shortly thereafter, Silas will tell you that Jake and George and Angela came up to his property and gave him the $2,500 for that truck. Jake will tell you that they modified the truck. They built a false bed in the truck. Jake will tell you he used 2x4s. You'll have pictures of the truck, but where the eye hooks were, there's a level plane, and then there's some eye hooks on top of that. He put the 2x4s up and then put plywood and then put hay on top of that, so it would look like the bed was full of hay. And instead, that's where he and George stowed away when they drove up to Chris Sr.'s that night, with their weapons and everything they needed for that night. He would tell you what they wore. They wore ski masks. They wore dark clothing. There was some concern that Brentley might recognize Jake because he had seen Jake on many occasions, and Sophia had always been able to recognize Jake even when he was in costume. He will tell you that they made plans with Chris Sr. Billy made plans with Chris Sr. about this imaginary drug deal. And so he was going to drive up to talk to Chris Sr. about that drug deal that night. And still don't know if it's a real thing or not, or if this was all just a feigned way for him to go up there. But that way Chris Sr. would be expecting them, right? So then no alarms would be sounded. They went up there around 10:30 p.m. First meeting at their house at 260 Peterson. Billy had come to Peterson driving his red dually. They had signed the custody documents that we had found. His mom had, Googled that and printed it and filled it out, and they just signed their name to it. He will acknowledge that they watched the Boondock Saints video clip before they left that night. He and George, anyhow, he remembers. And that when it was time to go, they walked out into the barn where the truck was that they had modified. They purposely kept it out of sight of the neighbors and stuff by parking it back behind that new barn, and changed their clothes out there. They didn't want to leave any shoe prints of those brand new Walmart shoes anywhere on their property until they were ready to get into the truck. And they got into the bed of the truck, and Billy drove the truck up to see his friend. And they remained in the back of that bed of the truck until such time as Billy came out and lowered the gate for them, at which point they slithered, I think was the word he used, out of the truck and got underneath that truck. And George got under that truck and Jake got under Chris Sr.'s truck, which is they had parked their vehicle right by one of Chris Sr.'s trucks. George had the SKS at that time. Again, that was his gun. Jake didn't really even like the gun. And George, the plan was that George was going to shoot Chris Sr. from a distance, like a sniper, in a fashion that Chris would never know what hit him, would never know that Billy Wagner was betraying him or whatever. Of course, Gary was there.
She
also.
did say that
They
today,
walked-
and
they
I
went
said
out
the
to,
I gave her the same
Outdoor
answer.
Road.
I think
They
we're at
walked
11
back,
billion at least.
in front of the house, and
Judge, can we reposition ourselves to see that?
Yes, certainly, yeah.
so
I mean, bless her heart.
So at the point that Chris and Gary were walking back
Vincent's.
the
Oh.
single file, that's when George was supposed to shoot.
I have her a little sped up cement shoots because it's a lot.
When you guys saw it, the trailer wasn't there, but this structure was there, and this is the garage, and then again, this is the path leading over towards Franklin's.
I don't know why they're focused on him instead of showing us, the viewer, this
These are
pathway.
on the trailer, isn't it?
We can't see anything.
So that he would not know. That's State's Exhibit A544.
And it just so happens,
Jake will tell you, however, that George was taking too long and seemed to be frozen.
well,
He
thank
didn't
you
know
in
it was
5,
because
6, 7, 8,
and
because
stuff
now
was
I
telling us.
notice
So
it
that
so much.
thing that we dug out of the well, the silencer that we dug out of the well, had all the parts that they had purchased to make the silencer. That was a prototype, but it had failed, right? And so they scrapped that idea and they decided to use filters instead, fuel filters instead. So they
At
had
least.
a silencer made out of a filter.
She said it a
on both
lot.
The SKS and the 1911. So the 40 Glock was the only weapon that did not have a silencer on it. So Matt White was right about all of the involved weapons. It was a 40 Glock, it was a 1911 22, and it was a high-powered 30 caliber SKS. So Jake didn't know if it was because the fuel filter was blocking his view, because Jake said when he had test fired the weapon, he found that to be an issue. Either way, ultimately, Jake took the weapon from George, and Billy at some point came back out to where they were and were questioning them why they hadn't shot. And at that time, Billy came up with a ruse of asking Chris Sr. to call his phone. I don't know where my phone is. Can you call it so I can find my phone? Well, truth be told, all the phones belonged to Billy and
Thank
Jake
you, cement
and,
shoes.
George were left back at Peterson Road.
But she said
actually
it
with
so
instructions
much.
to Angela, who remained back at the home with Bullvine and Sophia, to text people or use the phone so it would appear that they were at home this whole time, providing them an alibi. Of note, the phone jammer had worked when they tested it, but the battery ran out very quickly, Jake will tell you, and so it didn't work for long at all. And so you will see, I told you that 10:55 p.m. Time was very important. It's very important because
Yes.
that's when Chris Sr., at the request of his friend Billy Wagner,
Yes,
calls
Amelia,
to
she
his
does.
phone.
She
So
has
his
to
friend
record
becomes his
everything she says.
and really all that did was
And
open his
yes,
front
cement
door
shoes.
so that Jake could shoot him. And so we kind of know the time of death of Chris Sr. because it was shortly after making that phone call. He was standing in the doorway. That's why we have that SKS high-powered rifle.
So I talked a little bit over this, and I just want to go back and explain this. So what happened was this. The Wagner family left their phones at home, okay? And Billy was to knock on the door, and when Chris Sr. opened the door, Jake and George were supposed to fire, and they didn't. So they had to adjust their plan. And what Billy Wagner ended up doing was asking Chris Sr. to call his phone, knowing that obviously the phone was not there. It was at home. In fact, Angela was using the phones to text at that time. So it would appear as if the Wagners were there in their home rather than at the Roden residence. And so that's how they are able to determine pretty precisely now with evidence and also with Jake's statement what time this all took place and more and the time of death, because as the phone was being called, that is when they opened fire and they shot him in the doorway. And it was bad because he had like wood from the door, embedded in his skin. And so at this point, I know what everybody's thinking. Because this is what I was thinking. What could George the Fourth's defense possibly be? Right? So now that you guys get the gist of the opening statement, this is pretty much it. Like, I went over everything that she said for the most part, except for I forgot one little detail about the shoes. The interesting thing about these shoes, these tennis shoes, is that they were hideous. First of all, they're those tennis shoes that Walmart sells with the Velcro straps. Now, I don't know anybody that uses Velcro on their shoes past 1987, but what the crime scene tech noticed is that the impressions from the bottoms of the shoe were like brand new. Obviously, the more you wear a shoe, right, where your foot actually is, and also depends on what you do in the shoe, like if you're a runner or whatever, how much of the tread or the sole gets worn away on the bottom of the shoe, right? And what they noticed is that these shoes were brand new, which is another important point. Again, they purchased these shoes for the sole purpose of wearing them to this crime. These were not their everyday shoes. So that's a very, very important part of it. So now what I want to do is I want to let you guys hear the defense's closing statement. And I found this to be very interesting, although crap. Where is it? I just saw it. Hold on, let me see if I have it somewhere better. I think this is it right here. Yeah, it is. All right, hold on. Oh. All right, let me do that. Go over here. Sorry, you guys. Give me just a sec. And now we're going to hear the defense's opening statements. Hopefully. Oh, how come there's no closed captions? They were here earlier. Okay, this audio, I don't know if Long Crime has cleaned it up. When I watched it this afternoon, it was not good. So again, I will mute so that you guys can hear. Make sure it's turned up all the way. Okay.
Yes, can you do so? Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. April the 22nd of 2016. George Wagner lived on Peterson Road, and that day started off like most days. He got up that morning, but there was one thing instantly that was off. Jake was up before him. Normally, George's tasks for the day are to feed the animals there on the farm. But before George could get to that, George knew he had one task that he had to do that day, and that was to disassemble a building, a wood shed, so to speak, close by his home. That was the one thing that he had to do. But before George could take off to do that, he noticed that Jake was off in that new barn up on that hill on Peterson Road. You folks went there, you walked up that hill and you could look down on the house, that barn with the stalls. Jake was up there by himself. That's according to Jake. George eventually got ready to go disassemble that building, and Jake joined him. They went to that building, and when they got there, George realized he forgot his chainsaw, but they did as much work as they could do until they hit the point where they needed that chainsaw. And at that point, nothing seemed suspicious to George, although again, it was off, but Jake was already up that day, and usually Jake is the second to rise. While they were headed back home to Peterson Road, Jake's cell phone went off. There, the caller was Andrew Carson. Andrew Carson said, "Hello, Jake." And there he had a conversation. And that's when he thought he was the first to tell Jake that the mother of his child, Sophia, the child, that the mother, Hannah, had been murdered along with 6 of her relatives. At that point, Kenneth had not been found yet. Jake, according to Mr. Carson, put on an act worthy of an Academy Award, an act where he conned Carson into thinking that he was the first to tell him, as he wept and cried on the phone, and that is the first time George learned about murders. They returned to the Peterson home, and thereafter, the Pike County Sheriff arrived at those scenes and requested help. He requested help from the Bureau, Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation, what we refer to as BCI. After some time, BCI had narrowed down who they felt were suspects. In fact, it's worthy to note that BCI had interviewed Jake Wagner 4 times. In fact, the first interview was just 3 weeks after the murders. BCI, conducting their investigation, also felt it was important that they interview Angela Wagner, who they spoke to or interviewed on 3 occasions. 4. The third person that they felt that was important to talk to in the Wagner household was Billy Wagner. That's George's father. They spoke to BCI, spoke to Billy on 3 occasions. And on all of those occasions that BCI came around asking for cell phones, asking to speak with Jake, Angela, or Billy, George was right there. Not once did they ever ask to speak with George. He wasn't a suspect. In fact, George was only talked to 1 time. And the purpose of that 1 time is because BCI wanted to plant a bug or a listening device in their vehicle. So let me tell you about that. George and his family were coming back from Alaska. They were coming here to Ohio to speak with BCI. This is their destination. But BCI caught them at the border there in Montana, a little town called Sweetgrass. There's a border crossing. And so their intent, BCI, was to put a listening device in the Wagner vehicle to try and gain more information. Naturally, they had to take all the occupants out of that vehicle and speak with them to take time so they could put those devices in their vehicle. So we had special agents, again with BCI, who had 4 different rooms where they spoke with all 4 family members. And George had an agent there speaking with him, a special agent Hageman. Special Agent Hageman was spot on, I would say. That interview with Special Agent Hageman was kind of mixed. In the beginning, it was accusatory, but he backpedaled some, and he told George, "Your family has big problems, George. Your family." Agent Hageman also told George, "Do you want to be a witness, or do you want to be a suspect?" George knew his family had done a lot of bad things in their life, but he had never known of them to ever commit a crime of violence. He couldn't believe it. He denied it. He argued with them. And
For the hang on a minute. Oh, I'm trying to fast forward it. Oh my gosh, Jen. on okay, I want to show you guys this really quick. Can you see that? This is what I thought the graphic was, and now upon further review I realize I think it's a flag, not a striped jailhouse uniform. I need new glasses, I believe. Let me speed this up a little because I don't want to skip because I'm afraid. Actually, I think I remember this part. I feel okay. They went, I think they end up going into the chambers. Hang on.
You might continue your overseeing.
Thank you, Judge. So back to that interview room.
Hold on. Let me fix it. We don't need it at 2. All right. Now, I really need new glasses. That was terrible.
Few questions. Do you want to be a witness or do you want to be a suspect? Then he said, if I don't know who did it, then you all go down for conspiracy. And so Hageman never received any information. And here George says.
Oh, wait, hold on. I want to say one thing.
Who did it? You all go down for conspiracy.
Okay, so the prosecution objected to it, all right, which is really a waste of time, in my opinion, unless it's something completely egregious, like calling the lawyers a liar in the Halderson trial. That might necessitate an objection. But the bottom line is that the judge just going to tell the jury that the both sides' opening statements are not evidence. That's all they ever do. That's what happened in this situation. And you see, he obviously got to carry on saying what he said, which is that the special agent said to George in the interrogation room, do you want to be a witness or a suspect? Maybe I should do that.
About the state of Ohio against George Wagner.
Listen to some old broadcasts.
It's not the Wagners. It's not Billy Wagner. It's not Angela Wagner, nor is it Jake Wagner. This is all about George. I'm not going to take 5 hours to defend everything that Jake, Angela, and Billy did. This is a trial just about George. And so, as you hear the evidence in this case, you must ask yourself, every time you hear the Wagners, think of how that applies to George. Every time you hear they, a red flag should raise. Every time you hear them, every time you hear all of them, every time you hear Billy, Jake, or Angela. We're here to hear the evidence against George Wagner. There are certain things in life that we can't control. One of those things is our birth name. When we were brought into this world, we couldn't help who our parents were or are. And just like George cannot help that he was born into the Wagner family. The state wants to paint this with a broad paintbrush about the Wagners. Unfortunately, George cannot help that he's a Wagner, but that doesn't make him a murderer. As you hear the evidence in this case, there's 5 things I want you to pay attention to. The first is going to be what Jake says. Jake will tell you that George had nothing to do with the planning of these murders. Jake will tell you that George shot no one. Jake will tell you that George did nothing to destroy any evidence. That's the first thing. The second thing that I want you to pay attention to will be the credibility of Angela and Jake. The third thing that I want you to pay attention to is the incentives that were offered by the state of Ohio for such heinous crimes to Angela and Jake, to get them to talk, to get them to tell a story. The fourth thing is motive, because we know custody is not the motive. Everybody had a motive in this case to kill except for George. Angela had her delusions that were unfounded, that this child, Sophia, was being molested. And for that, she felt something had to be done. Jake, the evidence will be presented, was a very jealous and abusive young man towards Hannah. And you know what he couldn't stand is he couldn't stand that Hannah had moved on with her life, that she was with other men, and that enraged him. Angela had convinced him as well that Sophia was at risk of being molested, sexually abused, and Billy had his own motive. Billy was engaged in drugs. We've heard an awful lot about grow rooms. There were several grow rooms, and the drug activity is rife in this case. George had no motive to kill anybody in the Roden or Gilly family. And the fifth thing that I want you to pay attention to is how different George is from his family. So moving to that first thing, and that's the state's case. They're key witnesses, Jake and Angela Wagner. Jake has already spoke. In fact, he spoke in a room here with Agent Scheider. And you know what he said? He told Agent Scheider, he said, George had nothing to do with this plan. This plan was between me and my dad. We're the ones who planned this. My dad decided when it would happen, what equipment would be needed, and how it would be done.
Are y'all hearing the same thing I'm hearing? I'm hearing that George is making an actual claim of innocence, that he wasn't even there.
To perform these murders. He also told Jake certain things that needed to be done to commit these murders. But there will be no evidence that he told George to do anything to prepare for these murders. According to Jake, Billy decided the day, or would decide the day in which the murders would happen. Furthermore, Jake will tell you that George was not supposed to go. Billy picked a day that a drug deal was supposed to happen, or there would be a meeting to talk about a drug deal. George had nothing to do with drugs. You will hear no evidence of that. One of the tasks that Billy had for Jake was to acquire a vehicle that would be used in the commission of these murders. The other task that Billy had for Jake, and Jake will tell you that he and he alone made silencer for weapons. That was his task. That's what he did. He's already said that in a room with Agent Scheider. And you know, there's this hair, the coloring of the hair. According to Jake, he colored his hair. But Jake, the key witness for the state, will tell you that had nothing to do with murders. Jake will also tell you that this video, Boondock Saints, that he's the one who watched that.
It's a good movie. I'm not going to judge anybody for watching that.
There was a DVR that was all burnt up. Jake was asked about that DVR, and according to Jake, he told you that DVR was destroyed so it wouldn't capture stolen vehicles entering and exiting that Peterson property. Billy had some tasks for Angela as well. Billy had told her, remember, that George had nothing to do with the planning, but the task for Angela was to acquire shoes. Billy also asked Angela to acquire a cell phone jammer. And the purpose of that is to block cell phone use, so it can't be used. So in the instance that somebody needed to call for help, they would be unable to do that. And Angela did acquire that cell phone jammer. Billy also asked Angela, and she did so, followed the orders, and that was to acquire a bug detector. And when I say bug detector, it's a device to determine whether there's any surveillance devices recorded.
Thank you for
Billy
clarifying.
also
I was
told
worried
Jake
that they were
the
looking
last
for
task
actual
was
bugs.
You are to destroy these items, and Billy would dispose of the truck. George had nothing to do with disposing of his truck. Jake destroyed that evidence. Remember that morning when George woke up and Jake was up in that barn that you peeked into and you saw those stalls? Jake was up there alone. He was up there alone. He was destroying cell phones that he stole. He was destroying memory cards that were taken out of the Roden property so they could detect who was coming and going from that property. He was burning clothes. He was destroying silencers. And he was destroying weapons, specifically weapons that belonged to him and belonged to Billy. Jake and Jake alone dug a hole and buried that in that barn. George had nothing to do with that. And finally, and once again, Jake will tell you, George shot no one. And most importantly, there is no reliable evidence that George planned these murders. There's no independent, reliable evidence that George prepared for these murders. And there's certainly no reliable evidence that George shot anyone. That second thing I wanted to talk to you about is Jake and Angela. They're con artists and liars. We've already touched on it some, but Angela is the con artist through and through. You know, you're going to hear evidence that she burned her home on more than one occasion, committed arson, and then collected from her insurance company the proceeds on that. She started doing that when George was just 9 years old. Billy did the same with some vehicles. Billy is a professional thief. Jake took those traits from his mother and his father, all of those bad traits, and put it into one. They are a pair, and that's who the state has as their key witness. Con artists and liars. Jake and Angela fooled many people throughout this investigation, beginning with Mr. Carson on the phone. But you know what they did even after the murders? There's a child, if you remember, Hannah Roden had a newborn baby, and that newborn baby was named Kylie. It was Jake and Hannah who went together, and they brought Sophie over to the Gilly family, a family who they were responsible for taking their loved one, and acted as if nothing happened. That's the type of people that the state has selected as their key witnesses. Afterward, Jake went home and, at the direction of Angela, created a GoFundMe account to collect money, defraud people, to send him money so he could obtain custody of a child. The con didn't stop then. It's continued. It's who they are. The evidence will be that Jake and Angela have conned the state of Ohio here as well. They've conned the state of Ohio into the most heinous crime into a 30-year sentence. In a sentence most deserving of death, he escapes with life. The plea deal is what I'm speaking of. Jake and Angela have conned the state of Ohio with the greatest goal in mind, perhaps the most remarkable plea deal possible. As the prosecution said, the loss of 8 innocent lives, the most deserving of the death penalty, and Jake gets to walk.
Okay, I have a question here. I'm very curious to know. I know 5 and 5, 6, 7, 8. I am very, very curious about this because you know what this is reminiscent of? It's reminiscent of the Casey Anthony trial. All right. And remember when the defense basically put George Anthony on trial and the awful things that they said about George and even to a lesser degree, Casey's mom, what's her name that I can't think of right now, but you know who I'm talking about. I don't, for whatever reason, I can't think of her name, but this is what that reminds me of. I am very curious at if Angela, Billy, and Jake know that the defense is going to be doing this. I mean, this is the only play the defense has. I'm not against it. I totally get it, but I feel like that's what's happening here. And I'm going to tell you guys right now, if Jake and Angela decide that they do not want to be filmed, videoed, whatever, testifying, I'm going to be livid because I think they should have to. I think that they should be made to be videoed, to be quite honest with you. Especially because there's going to be family members who cannot attend this trial, and they deserve to know. They deserve to see what was said, not just for me, and not just for other people who want to watch this trial, who are interested in it and want to see justice, but really for the family, because there is family that can't attend these trials. So
Angela gets 30 years. They negotiated this plea agreement to save their life.
Cindy.
Prior
Yes.
to making this plea agreement, they had reviewed all of the evidence in this case with their attorneys.
No, I think you're right.
And so
Casey,
it
Cindy, and
begs the
George
question,
Anthony. I think you're right, Tony.
Why in the world would you grant such a gift to Jake and Angela to give them this in exchange, purchase that testimony? Well, it's simple. And it goes back to that last question that Hageman had. You're either a witness or you're a suspect. Because you see, there's no physical evidence George was at any of those murder scenes. There's no DNA, there's no prints. And BCI knew he had no motive. They knew that he was not involved in drugs. And you know, they knew they had only spoke with him one time, and that was for a reason. They have nothing on George. And because of that, that's a testament to the strength of their case for them to grant the deal that they've granted, and they were conned into the sentence that Angela and Jake have agreed. In order to avoid the death penalty, they must implicate George. Now, Angela gave a statement too, but what's really concerning about her story is she'll say that when everybody left to go commit murder, she went to sleep. She doesn't know what happened. She woke up the next day and it was never discussed. How convenient. She has nothing to offer that would contradict Jake's statement, because according to her, she never talked about it afterward. But they never talked about it.
I know,
She was
Tony.
thinking,
Watts Island be
that is what
doing us
happened.
all like that, doing us all dirty.
So,
Damn
Jake's
island.
confession. We know that there was evidence gained, and you heard about what was pulled out of that big pond. And you went there and you saw that pond, and there were some buckets that were pulled out of that pond. But, you know, Jake's statement really only implicates himself. There's nothing about Jake's statement that implicates George.
Well, I mean, except for him
Sure,
handing
maybe
him the
there's
gun.
evidence, but there is no independent, reliable evidence that George was involved in these murders. In fact, we believe the evidence will show that George could not have committed these murders. And it goes further. We believe the evidence will show that Jake, in fact, killed all 8. But he had to implicate his father in actually killing somebody. But the evidence will show that Jake killed all 8. The fourth thing I want to talk to you about is motive.
I know, Tony. I know.
George had his own life. He had his own son. He had everything going for him, and he had nothing against the Rodens or the Gills. He had no motive to kill any of these people. Everybody but
I just want to say this because if I don't get it out, I'll forget. And it's funny. I told Molson, man, that Watts Island is like that boyfriend that you don't claim during the day, but he be hitting you up at night and on the low, and you go and see him and you hate yourself the next day, but you can't quit him. That's how Watts Island is. Watts Island is that boyfriend.
But George had a motive. Angela's motive was this unfounded imaginary threat of sexual abuse. She convinced Jake that it was a realistic threat. Jake was already in a jealous rage that Hannah had moved on with her life. And Angela had brought this concern to Billy. Angela's suggestion was, we should turn him into the police. We should turn him into police because that'll take care of Christopher Roden Sr. because of his drugs. That's what we should do. Well, remember what I said about Billy and his motive?
Yes, Tony.
That idea hit too close to home. No, we can't do that. That's what Billy said. The evidence will be that Billy, according to Angela, said, we must kill him. The idea was taken to Jake, and you know, Jake's idea was, again, his jealousy surfacing, and said, we should do it, we should kill Hannah, but let's frame Hannah's boyfriend. Let's make it look like Corey Holdren did it. And once again, Billy said, no, that's not what we're doing. Once again, Billy's the one who created the plan. Jake went along with it. Angela went along with it. George had nothing to do with that plan. George had no motive, especially to kill who he considered his closest friends, Frankie Roden. You'll hear that Frankie Roden was one of George's closest friends. And Hannah Roden, you'll hear from many people. Hannah Roden was like a little sister to George. He had no reason to kill her. The last thing I want to tell you about is George is not like his mother, his father, or his brother. He's different from them. Sure, George was born into a family of con artists and thieves, but he never would have imagined that they would have committed
Pretty
crimes of
much.
violence.
Vincent's missing ear.
George disagreed with the way that his family lived their life. He disagreed with them so much, he actually engaged in physical fistfights with his father.
Oh, shit.
George disliked the way that family functioned so much, he was not part of them, that as soon as he could leave that home, as soon as he got his driver's license in 2006, when he was 16 years old, he left. He ran away. That's what the evidence will show. George, like most 16-year-olds, couldn't make it at 16. And so unfortunately, he had to come back home. Although he came back home, he took every opportunity with his new license, newfound freedom, and he avoided that home as much as he could. He wasn't there. Any opportunity that he could leave, he was gone. George ended up marrying a young girl who we've heard about. Her name is Tabby. Tabby come from a rough home. And George and Tabby had a child, and that child is George's world. It's a little boy, his name's Bullvine. Means everything to George. But you know, they were too young. They got married too young, and eventually George and Tabby got a disillusion. But you know what the evidence is going to tell you? The evidence will tell you that Tabby's mother offered her money, offered to give her money to go hire an attorney It was there. And Tabby said, no, I don't need an attorney. Tabby was given an agreement. It had everything spelled out about how this marriage would be dissolved, as well as custody of that little boy. Tabby reviewed it. She signed it. She went into a courtroom. She was questioned by a judge. Is this what you want to do? And she agreed. Which brings me back. Remember, we talked about Special Agent Hagan.
Yes.
When he spoke.
What did he say?
He told George, you're an outsider. And he is. I don't see you as this type of guy. In fact, there was another officer there, and that officer said, you did things the right way with your child. Talking about the court system. And that's how George is not like his family. George is an outsider. George does not go along with what his family does, and he didn't do it on that night. George is not guilty of murder. And we believe when you've heard all of the evidence, you will agree George had no part in this murder, and that you'll find him not guilty. Thank you.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. All right. So they end court after that. Okay. So I was curious about that this morning. Literally said, what in the actual F could his defense be? And now I understand it's an actual innocence defense. He is saying, I was not there. I didn't know. I didn't show. And that's that. And I will say this. He was very convincing. He was short, sweet, and to the point. He hit the major notes that you need to hit, the key points of the case as it pertained not only to refuting the prosecutor's opening statement, but also what they intend to prove as well. I appreciated the conciseness. I'm not going to lie though. I'm a little I'm a little taken aback at the way that he referred to Billy, Angela, and Jake Wagner, because I just wasn't prepared. And I've been trying to figure out, are they saying bovine, like B-U-L, like a B-U-L vine, or are they saying bovine like a cow, bovine? And you can't be relying on YouTube's closed captioning, because they say they throw words in there they didn't say, because they don't catch it correctly. But I will say that I feel that the defense's opening statement was better than the prosecution's. I think she, bless her heart, it's a very, very complex case. And one of the things that's interesting also about this case is the order in which they've done things, right? So the jury toured the crime scenes and some other places of interest pertaining to this crime. But they did it before, obviously they did it before opening statements or anything, which I found interesting, because, and I was, if you guys watched the interview that I did with George Jared, I asked him about this, because it is a good idea. Okay. I've only ever seen, obviously, the crime scenes from the aerial, that chopper view that I put in the video. And then there's like pictures, obviously, online, like a map, you know what I mean? But I think seeing it, particularly not just seeing the properties, but to see the homes themselves, to see how much space, but okay, Vincent's got it. Like Bo, the name, but I see. Okay, that's not as bad. But yeah, to be able to see how small or how large and whatever, the layout and stuff, that's really important to the jury, for juries to see, especially when you're talking about the prosecution's theory about the way that this went down and how it was like essentially after the snafu with the gun at Chris Sr.'s house, everything after that, everything pretty much had to go off without a hitch. And it did, unfortunately. So that's important, but I'm curious if they're going to be able to remember all of that, because like I said, this is Tony, because this case or this trial is supposed to be like somewhere between 6 and 8 weeks. That's what they said, 6 to 8 weeks. So, okay. This is where I leave you guys. I want to thank everybody for being here and listening intently to what I was saying, or not intently. I can't really see you, so I don't know if you're listening intently, but you seem to be because you're participating in the chat. I can see the chat's on task. So I'm just going to, yeah. And for giggling along with me when I thought it was a jailhouse uniform when it's actually the American flag in the background. I'm not even in the 90s. I'm like 73% sure that's at least a Bible that they're holding in that graphic or that painting or whatever the hell it is back there. But I don't want to, bet. I'm not going to bet any money on it or anything of any importance, because I'm questioning everything now at this point. But I will be. Hey, Elizabeth Ferguson, welcome. I'm going to be live tomorrow morning, and now that the defense has given their opening statement, I'm really curious though. Just while I'm thinking about it real quick before I say goodbye for real. I'm really, really curious about what the defense is going to put on to prove what they're saying. And the thing is that it sounds like from the opening statements that George's ex-wife, Tabitha, might testify. And I'm very curious about that, because she is integral to the case. She would be excellent at establishing how it is to be, how it feels to come into that type of family versus, it's one thing when you're born into a family, right? But then when this family seems dysfunctional, honestly. I don't even know another better way to say it. And I'm not even trying to be judgy or rude. It appears at this point that they're quite dysfunctional, and how they, that Angela was incredibly controlling. So I'm very, very curious how the state is going to, and the defense, really, because the state, they're going to have the expert witnesses. They're going to have, the crime scene, the autopsy. They're going to have all of the things, right? But I'm curious as to what evidence the defense is going to put on, because I don't think this is going to be one of those cases where it would be a good idea, like in Chandler Halderson's case, to let the burden lie with the state, which is where it belongs, but they don't put any evidence on, really. You know what I mean? I'm curious to see if George himself will testify. I do agree that it is interesting, the plea deal that the mother got. Oh, okay. Let's see. I can't wait to hear his ex-wife testify. I know her sister very well, and I'm curious of everything she has to say about George's personality. Yes, exactly, because the way the prosecutor laid out the opening statements with respect, especially to Angela, and the way that family was, and the way that they treated the girlfriends, then, well, Hannah and Jake never did get married, but the girls, the women, well, I can't even say, I mean, Hannah was just 13, but their significant others that they brought into the family, the way that they were watched and monitored and isolated. And I am very, 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 very curious about all of just exactly what you said, Elizabeth. All the things that you said you're curious about, I too am curious. So, that being said, I want to thank you guys all for being here. I appreciate it very, very much. If you haven't done so already, would you please give me a thumbs up? If you know anybody that you think would like to watch this trial with us, please feel free to share out the live, share out the channel link, whatever you want to do, however you want to do it. What else? I will be live tomorrow morning. Court starts at 9. And I'll be here live at 9. No, let me do this. Let me do 8:55 or 8:50. That way it gives everybody a chance to come in, notifications to go out, because I know YouTube is super sometimey about it. So that's what I'll do. And yes, Elizabeth, see, this is interesting. I'm glad you brought that up, because I was thinking about it when he was the defense attorney was talking. What's interesting to me about is the wording that he chose with respect to that custody agreement, that Tabitha had the option to have an attorney and she declined, and that she instead, there was an agreement drawn up and she went before a judge and, agreed to this agreement. And I think from a purely paperwork point of view, if you were just looking at the custody agreement, right, and that she signed it and that she wasn't represented by an attorney at the time, looking at it just that way, obviously he's not wrong and he's not lying about what he's saying, right? That is what she did sign it. She did agree to it. But what the paperwork won't show, and we would get from testimony, would be the conditions under which she signed it, because one of them is not one side is not telling the truth. It was either the way the prosecution says it, which is that she was essentially bullied, pressured, and all of that into this custody agreement. And or it's the way that the defense says it went down. And that's going to be, that part of it, that is going to be important, because if your argument is that George is not like his family, George does things the right way, then the testimony ought to bear that out, right? So it will be very interesting what she has to say, because, yeah, I'm very, 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 very curious. But I really, now for reals, I have to get off of here, because it's a school night, y'all, and it's 10:40 here. I don't even know why y'all are even up. It's a school night. What are you doing up so late? Just kidding. But I will see you guys at 8:55. I'm going to do, no, let me do 8:50. That goes 10 minutes. Let me do 8:50 tomorrow morning, but right and early, and we will get to our first witness. I don't know the order in which witnesses will be called. So remember, this is a criminal proceeding. This is the murder of 8 people. And so there's probably going to be, at some point, if it's not tomorrow, it'll be some point in this trial where the testimony might be graphic. I would and could be potentially triggering. So exercise your viewer discretion. And I will see you guys all tomorrow. Thanks for coming. Good night, you guys. Have a great rest of your Monday night, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.